Everyone, bonjour tout le monde, depending on where you are in this country, and welcome to this today's webinar. My name is Jeff Morrison. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, and I'd like to first start by acknowledging that I am sitting in the traditional territory of the Algonquin people, and I thank them for allowing me to live, work, and play on their traditional territory. So before we begin, I'll just first provide a few brief remarks on the webinar technology for today, and then introduce you to today's panelists. So this webinar is in real time. You should now be able to see a title screen of today's presentation and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or your telephone. You are currently all muted, and we do this to minimize any background noise. If you wish to ask a question or make a comment, you may type those into the chat box on the webinar control panel at any point in the presentations. I'll be keeping track of the questions and comments and get to as many of those questions as we can at the conclusion of the presentation. La majorité des commentaires aujourd'hui seront en anglais. Mais n'hésitez pas à faire des commentaires ou à poser des questions dans l'une ou l'autre des langues officielles. Donc, if you'd like to put questions or comments in the chat box in either official language, please do so. You're more than welcome. Our presenters can respond en anglais ou en français. So, the 10-year co-investment fund was first announced in the National Housing Strategy in November 2017. And is meant to provide a combination of loans and contributions to community housing providers to renew existing housing and build new. Since it was first launched in 2018, the fund has invested in over 70 projects totaling well over $2.2 billion. However, since its launch, housing providers have raised concerns over the co-investment fund's processes, timelines, and policies. CHRA has been in regular communication with CMHC in order to share these concerns. In response, in 2020, CMHC undertook a review of the program, which has resulted in dozens of recommendations to reform the program. Aujourd'hui, nous allons entendre des autres fonctionnaires de la SCHL parler de certains des changements clés qui ont été ou seront apportés au programme pour répondre à certaines des préoccupations qui ont été soulevées et pour faciliter le programme pour les fournisseurs de logement. So today we're going to hear from senior CMHC officials on some of the key changes that either have been made or will be made to co-investment to respond to some of the concerns that have been raised and to hopefully make the program easier for housing providers to access. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our guests from CMHC. So first of all, pleased to welcome Caroline Saint-Fasson, who is Vice President of Housing Solutions Multi-Unit. Second, Carol, and Carol knows I never get last names correct, but Carol Fritich, I apologize, Carol, who is Senior Manager of Client Relationships and Operations, Affordable Housing, located in British Columbia. And third, and of course, last but of course not least, Ben Adam, who is Senior Manager of Financial Solutions, Financial Prioritizations, and Allocation. So again, welcome to all of you and to our guests. And I will now pass the virtual floor over to, I believe it's Caroline, who will begin the presentation. So Caroline, c'est à vous pour commencer.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be joining you virtually from Montreal on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kenyan Kehage Mohawk. This is a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. And thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. My colleagues and I at CMHC deeply value the strong relationship that we have with CHRA. We appreciate the excellent feedback and ideas that you have shared with us over the years, especially during these unprecedented times. All of us here today have always understood the critical importance of having a safe and affordable place to call home. The COVID-19 crisis has made this obvious to all Canadians. At the same time, The pandemic has put a spotlight on Canada's deep housing gaps and pressing needs, particularly amongst the most vulnerable. These are not new, but the pandemic has made them much worse. And these difficult times have only strengthened our commitment to work with partners like CHRA. It is only through partnership like this one uh, that we will achieve our goal by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. In December, we released a refreshed corporate strategy. It reflects our changing environment and it gives more details on how we will focus our work to meet the housing needs of the most vulnerable in our country. A key addition to our strategy is a commitment to advancing reconciliation with Indigenous people and increasing our support to Indigenous partners. We're also doing more on climate change and to increase the resiliency of housing so it will last for generations to come. Finally, we are prioritizing the experimentation of new ideas and solutions so that we can move more quickly and effectively to make housing more affordable for Canadians. Any new approach that we will pursue will be informed by the lived experience of those in housing needs. They will be grounded in a human right-based approach to housing and the principles of reconciliation. One of the most effective tools we have to support you to create more affordable housing is the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. The uptake for this initiative has been growing steadily, and as you will hear shortly, we're making strong progress on our goals. We heard feedback from you that the co-investment fund process was not as easy as it should be. We listened to your feedback, and over the past year, we've made a number of important changes that my colleague and I will introduce to you today. Our goal is that these changes make for a better client experience throughout the process and to reduce the end-to-end program turnaround time. We are committing to being responsive to your need. We have adapted our program based on your feedback and needs so that it gives you a streamlined experience from beginning to end, a better user experience on our website with our client tools and on the application portal, and a simpler process. We've heard that these improvements have already been making a difference, but we remain open to your feedback. We will continue to listen and will continue our efforts to improve your experience with CMHC in the coming years. I'm joined today, as Jeff mentioned, by a couple of my colleagues who can tell you more about the National Housing Co-Investment Fund and the change we've made. With that, I'd like to invite Carol Friketich, our Senior Manager, Multi-Unit Housing Solution in BC, to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Carolyn. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be joining you virtually from Victoria, located on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. As Carolyn mentioned, we're here today to provide you with information on the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, and I'm going to start by detailing the program. So if we can flip to the next slide, please. For those not familiar with this fund, it is a signature initiative of the National Housing Strategy with $13.2 billion available over 10 years in low interest repayable loans and contribution to support a wide range of housing projects across Canada. I'll talk a little bit about what it is and how it works, but an update on the progress that we've made first. Since the start of the program to September of last year, we've approved more than 170 applications, totaling $1.8 billion in loans and $1 billion in contributions to support the creation of almost 77,000 new and repaired units. Now, this is fantastic, and it is in excess of the cumulative annual targets halfway through the third year of the program. The National Housing Co-Investment Fund, as I mentioned, provides low-cost financing. It's designed to attract partnerships and investments and to incentivize new construction or repair that meets or exceeds minimum requirements around social outcomes, including affordability, accessibility, energy efficiency, and serve the most vulnerable in our country. The co-investment fund is expected to create 60,000 new homes and repair up to 240,000 units of existing affordable and community housing. This includes supports for shelter spaces for survivors of violence, transitional and supportive housing, and also new ways to make homeownership more affordable. Given these ambitious targets and the budget available, it's very important that applicants to the co-investment fund have other contributors to your project, as CMHC will or may not be the main funder in most cases. So this co-investment fund will support projects, as I mentioned, that attract additional funding from federal government, other levels of government, non-for-profits, and the cooperative housing providers, as well as the private sector. So some key questions you need to consider when you're structuring your project from a financial perspective. Who are the other funders? How will they contribute to the project and participate in the project? What is their capacity? And are there conditions tied to their funding? Client solution specialists will work with eligible groups to prepare their application and complete a client readiness checklist. So this is a little bit how it works. And the intake of the application is via the online portal. It's continuous. Applications are verified for completeness, scored for social outcomes, and once they pass prioritization, the project is underwritten and the loan documents are prepared. Applications for the co-investment fund, as I mentioned, are scored to provide a measure for prioritization. It's an incentive-based approach. Simply put, the higher the score, the more successful your application will be. Projects will be prioritized higher should they go over and above minimum requirements. And that could be around greater collaboration, partnership with other government supports, greater depth of affordability in rents, a greater proportion of affordable units in your project. If you have energy efficiency beyond minimum requirements and reductions in GHG, as well as measures of accessibility for greater social inclusion and proximity to transit are also considered in assessing the application. We understand the power of stacking funding and how this can be challenging. And for this reason, we have been working with partners to do this in a much more streamlined way to make it a better experience for you. And I'd like to talk about 3 examples with you now. Firstly, we've coordinated with municipalities that are issuing requests for proposals for affordable housing to align the social outcomes in their RFPs and pave the way for proponents to meet co-investment criteria. In British Columbia, we've done this work with both the Capital Regional District in Victoria, as well as with the City of Burnaby. We've also worked with provincial entities to align criteria and enhance the client experience. Again, BC example, being from BC, we've coordinated with BC Housing in their most recent funding call, the Community Housing Fund, and joined them in their webinar launch for their RFP to explain the co-investment fund, the program criteria. We also shared tips for layering funding. And the biggest piece of advice there is to speak to both funders early on so that we can align how we're going to participate in your project. The BC Housing also referenced the co-investment fund criteria in their RFP and encouraged proponents to apply for both funding streams. Also, CMHC worked with potential applicants to this funding to prepare a support letter that formed part of the provincial funding applications. In terms of working with other organizations, we've also worked closely with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, or FCM, and other organizations as potential sources of funding that can be layered with co-investment. You may well know that FCM's Green Municipal Fund, which as of 2020 is now available for nonprofits and others, aligned program criteria with the co-investment criteria. And so you have access to another source of funding there. We're also working with clients to make impactful improvements to the program and to allow for a better end-to-end experience. So with that, I'll turn this over to Ben to elaborate on these improvements we've made to the process and what it means to you.
Thanks, Carol. Merci beaucoup. And so I'm very pleased to be joining you virtually from just north of Montreal, located on the traditional lands of Algonquin, Mohawk, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe. This is a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. So looking at client experience improvement in 6 different areas. Our teams have worked really hard to put in place many improvements to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, responding to client feedback, and I hope you're starting to see the benefits. We have 6 areas of focus for our process improvements throughout 2020 and into early 2021 in order to better meet the needs of our clients. These changes will allow CMHC to better set expectations and provide transparency into our process, as well as allow CMHC to process client applications as efficiently as possible. At a high level, they are clarity on program eligibility, with new e-learning modules that walk through the financial viability requirements. Important to call out here that through these changes, there have been no changes to the actual program eligibility itself. Second one being new required documentation checklist, as clear process timelines are better set expectations earlier. We evaluate the readiness of a project and address application gaps earlier in the process. This allows us to process applications quicker based on complexity. As well, clarity of the CMHC context throughout the process. We really invested in staff training and resources to strengthen our team and responsiveness. Increase usage of tools and process, increase our efficiency. We've listened and actioned client feedback from client conversations, client surveys, and consultations. As well, this is an enhanced user experience and support provided on program website, online applications, and the client tools. So let's take a deeper look. So starting with program design, we're transparent and setting clear expectations on program eligibility. As I stated previously, there really hasn't been any changes to the eligibility itself. It's important to note that our CMHC specialists are always available to work with you. To make your experience better, based on client consultations, we saw the opportunity to enhance our financial viability calculator and scoring grid. Revamp the financial viability calculator scoring grid on our website, adding terminology, auto-populate fields to provide additional guidance, new supporting links, and added additional comment boxes with instructions and tips on how you can fill the document correctly. Happy to report that this is available for you guys to access right now. Additionally, there's a new series of e-learning modules that will be coming soon, end of February, early March, to demonstrate how to accurately complete each tab of the Financial Viability Assessment Workbook, show how to understand the preliminary results and the funding associated with that. We've also added clarifying process timelines to the CMHC website. I've highlighted more details regarding what to expect in the legal documentation in the process, such as our letter of intent, this term sheet, and the loan package. Another area of opportunity was the PDF application update. And so during our recent National Housing Co-Investment Fund client consultations, it was actually mentioned by a few clients that they would prefer to use an offline PDF version of the application in their planning process. This allows for collaboration with their colleagues, and then they're ready to submit. They can ensure that they've met with a CMHC specialist, putting all their information, their responses into the questions in the online portal itself. This really helps since the application portal only allows for one person to log on to it or host the account. Therefore, the PDF really is an easier way to collaborate internally with their colleagues or with an external consultant is another example. Hoping to get this later in the month of February. And really, this is just it's a great example of sometimes how small little changes can really have a pretty big impact. So now I'll go back to Carol to talk a little about some of the client expectations.
So thanks, Ben. One of the key changes that we've made in improvements to the co-investment fund is the introduction of a client readiness checklist to help applicants know upfront what is required prior to submitting an application, so no surprises for you. This checklist will help you to clearly understand document requirements and timelines. It shows you what is needed at different steps in the process. As well, our client solutions specialists will be working more closely with you to prepare your application and support you in gathering the documentation and information that previously would have been requested following submission of the application. This concierge service, as we're calling it, means you can work with a client solutions specialist to review readiness prior to submitting your application. Our goal is really to ensure that your application can be properly assessed once submitted, and this will just enable us to serve you better. The feedback on these changes so far has been very positive. We've got a quote from a client here. You can see that the requirement document checklist is very detailed, and it is helpful to know what is needed at the time of application for each phase. I found the process fairly straightforward.
And so now let's talk a little bit about the rate engineering process. And so we've simplified our processes, and we're very pleased with this progress. I want to thank you for the role that you've played in contributing to these great results. Some of the process improvements were to internal processes that may not be visible externally, but I can assure you that they will have tangible results in the client experience. So we measure and become tangible to clients through our measurement of this process. Through this exercise, we recognize that while most deals are quite unique, we're able to leverage previous examples and identify appropriate solutions that fit the need of that given file. We continue to have strong internal collaboration to make sure we're passing along lessons learned. What I mean by that is sharing the knowledge that we've accumulated internally across the underwriters to make sure that we are leveraging the strength of the greater team. We're triaging and processing applications quicker based on the complexity of the project so that resources are used most efficiently to provide timely decisions to the clients. Again, we've got another quote from my client there. It says, "The program has evolved and the process was more rapid. Criteria are very transparent and there are clear tools."
To identify the many improvements that we've been discussing today, we engaged an external review consultant and dedicated our efforts towards implementing tangible enhancements that drive results for you. We set targets around turnaround time and client experience metrics, and as a result, our clients do have more transparency in the process from application preparation to funding flowing. We've also invested in our staff, as Ben mentioned, for training and internal resources, strengthening and enabling our teams and supporting them day to day. Client consultations and follow-up surveys so far outline the appreciation of the improvements implemented to date, including the provision, as we mentioned, of clear timelines, the client readiness support documentation, increased transparency with process, and client file status. And again, another appreciative client happy to give us their input. Finally, in terms of technology and improvements, CMHC has received feedback since the launch of the National Housing Strategy that our website could be improved. We listened, and based on client feedback and input, CMHC has revamped the website. Enhancements include improvements to the online application portal, navigation, with the addition of guiding text to support application completion. CMHC has streamlined it as well to cater the type of information that you're searching for, adding in helpful pro tips, simplified language, and added guidance of timelines as well. So we'd like to take a few moments now to walk you through 3 examples, great projects that the National Housing Co-Investment Fund has supported.
Great, and so thanks, Carol. We have a great repair renew project here located in London that will serve young adults leaving the care of the Children's Aid Society. On the screen to the left, you can see there's a shot of the exterior of the building. I want to mention the fact that this is a 135-year-old heritage building. Was developed to include 6 transitional housing units. On the 2nd and 3rd floor, leaving the main floor is a computer lab / resource center. Excellent social outcomes here, with all the units being considered affordable, with an average rent measured at about 20% of the median market rent. And we're going to see that affordability in place over the next 50 years. So a little bit of background around this project. This is an example of a file that was submitted in the early days of the National Housing Co-Investment Fund back in November of 2018. Early April 2019, a conditional approval was issued on this application for a little over $500,000. Once the conditional approval was issued, the project ran into a couple of bumps. Some of you might be able to relate to offers coming in higher than expected. There were some legal considerations that had having to have the building, the attached buildings, and the land that needed to be severed. with the increased cost of construction, there was some shortage of funds that led to the conditions being satisfied actually almost a year later into July of 2020. Want to call out here again that these types of things are not they're not uncommon. They do happen from time to time, and it's worthwhile to consider any buffers to your timelines, especially when you're dealing with older buildings. Once the conditions had been satisfied, we'd already implemented a new number of our new processes that allowed for us to shorten our turnaround times and get to an agreement out to this group within 3 weeks of having their conditions satisfied. And then once that funding agreement was sent out to the group, we were able to get funds transferred out to them at our next available disbursement, which was a great news story for this group.
In BC, this is Linda's Place. It's a new development on Vancouver Island and Campbell River. It consists of 27 new units, including units dedicated to head injury clients and their families, providing an affordable place to call home. It's located in the downtown core and offers programs and services available to the residents. This is an example of a deeply affordable project that delivers on our commitment to the environment with a 25% reduction in GHG and energy consumption. This project received great support from other levels of government, from both the province and the municipality.
So as we look at this file, this is another example of one of our earlier files being submitted in October 2018 and being conditionally approved shortly thereafter in April 2019. The conditions on this one were relatively quick to be satisfied, coming in about 4 months after the fact of having their conditional approval. It's important to note this project had actually already secured their construction financing to ensure their project there's funding available to see the project through to completion. What I want to note here is that while it's very good to get the construction going, it's important, as we mentioned a little earlier, to understand the conditions of the other financiers on the project to ensure that the conditions from one funding source don't interfere with another. We mentioned it's a co-investment program meant to maximize federal investment towards sustainable, affordable housing stock. And we do continue to work, as Carol mentioned earlier, very closely with the other levels of government, both at a macro level and a micro level at the individual files, to continue to push for solutions that deliver these projects through to fruition as fast and quickly as possible. So the third example we want to go through, this is a new 123 unit affordable housing project in Montreal. This project yet to be announced, and therefore there's some anonymity to it. Mainly aimed at students, but it will also accommodate young families moving into the neighborhood, some seniors and full-time workers. Fantastic neighborhood, very well placed, delivering excellent environmental impacts. We're seeing a 56% reduction in greenhouse gases and a 42% reduction in energy consumption. So if we talk a little about some of the context behind this application, this reporter was a little bit hesitant to submit their application to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund because of a bit of a perception around the fund's ability to turn around files quickly. The project explored a couple of other programs, and after a couple of conversations with their CMHC representatives, concierge, if you will, they submitted their project to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund in mid-August 2020. So with this project having all of their documentation ready, we were able to quickly work through the analysis of the file. We were able to conditionally approve them for a $20 million loan in a matter of 6 weeks. I can't stress enough of how having a well put together project in collaboration with their CMHC specialists really made this possible. The size and scope of the project, the $20 million, it's not always the size of the loan that can dictate the length of this. It really is about having a good collaboration and having documentation ready to go for us.
Thanks, Ben. So looking forward, we're very eager to explore opportunities around repair and renewal projects with our partners from CHRA. We have aggressive targets and budgets to support these targets. We're very committed to continual improvement. We've made great progress so far. We hope that you're seeing the results of that, but we're continuing to be looking for more improvement, streamlining end-to-end processes that deliver better client experience. The National Housing Strategy is kicking off a stock take exercise this coming fiscal year. This triennial stock take is an opportunity for government through CMHC to review what's been achieved as part of the National Housing Strategy, to assess actions required to meet the targets and goals, and to reflect on opportunities. So we will examine the National Housing Strategy programs, such as the Co-Investment Fund, to assess whether the original designs and current delivery approaches are achieving maximum efficiency and effectiveness. We will be identifying pain points, successes, and opportunities to assess whether we're achieving the overall objectives of the National Housing Strategy. So we remain focused on collaboration to better integrate co-investment with provincial and municipal partners and other funders. And we're very pleased to continue to work with the CHRA. Our goal for 2021 is to build solutions with you, and our ask of you is to let us be part of the solutions. So thank you very much. We would be very pleased to answer any questions you may have dans la langue de votre choix. Merci.
Well, thank you, Carol, Caroline, and Ben for the overview. Appreciate those comments. As you were all presenting, we had a couple questions come in. One question that's been asked a few times is whether this recording and this presentation will be available after the fact, and the answer is yes. We will make this presentation and the notes available. Et une autre question est-ce que la présentation était disponible en français? Et je crois que la réponse est oui. Et Caroline, tu peux vérifier ça, mais je crois que la présentation, les notes peut être disponible en français.
Oui, on peut absolument rendre la présentation disponible en français et on peut aussi présenter en français si la demande est là, pas de problème.
Okay. Merci. So we have a number of questions. I will try and get through as many as we can in the next roughly half hour. If we do not get to any specific questions, we'll be taking notes, and we can always follow up with everyone on the call today with written responses if we don't get to all of the questions today. So first, there were just a couple process questions. One person was asking that it seems that the focus of the changes you've been discussing were around processing. The question has been whether there have been any revisions to the scoring grids or the point ratings. For example, the questioner asked, perhaps putting greater priority on energy efficiency rather than affordability, for instance.
The answer is yes, you're absolutely correct. The focus was on the process. In terms of the risking grid and the prioritization grid, it's actually on the plan for this year for the team to look at.
Okay. Another questioner was asking about the changes that you described are more about those that have already been implemented. And the questioner's asking, they were hopeful to hear about forthcoming changes that will enhance the functionality of the program rather than those that have already been put in place. Are there anything more looking forward that you can share?
Well, we would be very interested to hear some feedback of what the member is proposing, so we can look into it. Absolutely. In terms of the program itself or its requirement, this will be part of the stock take. That will be a separate review. But if there are any suggestions for us to improve on our process, we would really be interested to hear and take that away.
Okay. And I think to everyone on the line, that's something that we at CHRA can definitely help. If folks are still having concerns about the program, please do communicate, and perhaps we can summarize those in an additional communication to CMHC. Someone, and I think Ben, this might be a question for you. When you were referring to the fillable PDF form in your presentation, the questioner is asking, will that be an additional file to upload in addition to filling out the portal applications?
Yeah, Jeff. So it's a great question. No, it's not. It's not an additional document. It's really meant to help kind of support the application process and give groups, people, the opportunity to collaborate with their application before actually logging into the portal and having the individual enter the information out.
Okay, thank you. Nous avons une question en français. Dans le cadre de l'entente Canada-Québec sur le logement qui était juste à mettre en place quelques mois, la CHQ, la Société d'habitation du Québec, s'est vue d'attribuer un droit de veto sur tous les projets qui pourraient être déployés au Québec dans le cadre de le programme. Quel impact cela aurait-il sur le processus de traitement des demandes par le SCHL? Est-ce qu'il y a un changement à cause de cette entente?
Oui, non. En fait, l'entente établit l'opportunité d'avoir une table ronde avec la province du Québec et de regarder ensemble, lorsqu'on reçoit les applications, quelles applications on a reçues, la population qui serait servie et comment on peut travailler avec la province du Québec sur ces applications-là. Et à ce moment-là, être capable de fournir l'information ou la décision rapidement. Alors, je pense que ça nous permet d'avoir le support de la province dès le départ. En fait, c'est l'objectif.
Okay, merci. Question's been asked whether have any directives been given to the CMHC legal department or possibly being contemplated, excuse me, to allow for modification to the standard form templates. And the questioner is making the point that the one-size-fits-all approach with a standard legal template can be difficult to navigate and sometimes just simply doesn't work.
We actually are customizing, I think it's half of the contract that we're signing. And also some of our process improvements that we haven't talked specifically about that relates to efficiency, relate also to certain documents or legal contracts, which have been revised depending on certain situations. So there's the long form that many of you might have seen, but there's also shorter form if the application warrants it, that is now available. So,
okay, thank you. Carol, this might be one for you. You mentioned, Carol, in your remarks about stacking, and you use BC Housing an example. The question is how does the stacking work between CMHC and BC Housing? There still seem to be issues with who's in first and second position for lending. Sometimes the feedback, and this may be in other provinces as well, but the feedback is that you can only get a grant from CMHC if you have a loan or a contribution through, in this case, BC Housing, before you can go through the co-investment. So there's sort of a chicken or egg scenario that happens here.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you to whoever asked that question. It is not one that keeps me up at night, but one that I'm very interested in addressing. We have been working very closely with BC Housing to look at how we can make this work for proponents and make it much easier for proponents. And this isn't just, stacking isn't just when we look at between provincial and federal governments, it's also if you have other funders in the program, it's very important that you have everyone sit down and discuss the timing of the funds flowing, any ties to requirements, the usage of those funds, and then how we work together in terms of the first and second position for lending. So there's many aspects of this conversation that we would like to sit down with proponents to understand and work through before any agreements are signed. So I think it's just critical to come and have the conversation with CMHC and our specialists. And we are very much looking forward to making this work. With respect to the CHF funding program, as you heard earlier, we have been working very collaboratively with BC Housing to set our proponents up for success with both funders. And I'm very excited to see how that rolls out once BC Housing makes their selections over the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you. We've had a couple questions regarding the energy efficiency requirements, and one that I'll just ask right away. There has been some leniency on energy efficiency percentage requirements for some organizations. And the question is, will that continue? Will there continue to be leniency in the energy efficiency criteria, or will it be a firm reduction percentage moving forward?
Maybe I'll jump in and kind of talk a little bit about, in the context of co-investment, it's important for us to evaluate files on a case-by-case basis, and we have set criteria for which the government of Canada allows us to administer the program through our loans and through our forgivable loans. And within the context of that, we have the opportunity to explore some flexibilities. And so different cases, different scenarios on a file by file situation will require us to call for some creative approaches. I think what's important to kind of call out is, as we start to explore the concept of flexibilities, it's really important to kind of think through the story behind what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. Tell the story of kind of why the flexibility might make sense in this project, and help us position it such that it makes sense in that file specific case as to why this is the best solution for this.
Okay. A question that's coming in and sort of changing gears quite a bit here. Question from my friend Nick. Does CMHC have data on what kind of rent levels tenants must pay once they're in a co-investment funded housing project? And if you don't have rent level information available, could that be potentially provided by CMHC upon request? Nick, I think you may stump.
No. Well, we have rent level, we have rent information available through our HMI portal, and the specialist can help you access the information on rents. And then via the viability calculator, you'll see in there what kind of different rent levels you achieve, how that will affect your application score. But I think the other part of the question is, after you've got your project approved and funded, how do you track the rents in your unit? And we're, well, Ben, maybe over to you. This is talking about the follow-up.
Yeah, and so Carol's absolutely right. And on the way in, there's the tools that we have to kind of provide rent levels and help calculate and figure out what rent level makes sense from a project perspective. And we'll look at that in underwriting. But once that project gets up and running in 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years down the road, through the agreement, there's some opportunity for us to provide some reporting back to CMHC to make sure that the affordability that was set out originally at the project is maintained. And so I hope that answers the question. We'll take the reporting that comes back from the group to make sure that the affordability that was set out at the onset of the project is maintained throughout the life of the project.
Great. Okay. And just on this theme of data and quantitative analysis, someone has asked, what is the longest term loan that could be obtained, and what are the current rates looking like? And I know interest rates fluctuate and they vary, but are you able to share, at least as of today, sort of what you're anticipating in terms of rates?
The maximum loan term that we have is 10 years. It can be rolled over to another 10 years. In terms of rate, as you said, Jeff, it varies because we're fixing it at the first advance. It will vary based on the 10-year Canada bond and also the pattern of the advance. I believe right now we're in the range of 1.5 to 1.8 for the 10-year. Am I right, Carol or Ben? I haven't looked recently, but I think that's what it is these days.
I haven't checked recently, but that sounds pretty close.
Yeah,
Okay.
bottom line, it's very good.
It should be the best rate you can find because that's the benefit of the co-investment fund. We have access to Canada, which is the cheapest rate, and the government of Canada is giving us funding to support our administration. So we're passing everything back to the proponent.
Okay. And another data question is Jennifer's asking, what percentage, or do you know which percentage or ratio of projects, either projects or funding, have been committed to renewal and retrofit versus new construction? Would you have that sort of breakdown or ratio?
I'll go and say that I think the vast majority, I think the projects we've seen, we see it, not the vast majority, we see majority of projects come in under the new construction. And we are starting to see more and more projects come in under the repair stream to be able to upkeep and maintain the affordable housing stock that's currently in place.
Okay. One of the challenges or concerns that's been raised, and I think Carol, especially in British Columbia, with the program has been regional allocations, and so someone's asking whether CMHC is considering any allocations to regional governments or regions for development of new affordable units. Are you looking at sort of a more regional allocation approach?
Well, Jeff, as you know, the National Housing Strategy and the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, it's national. And so we don't have any regional allocation under the co-investment fund. It's a merit-based program and where we're looking to maximize social outcomes of the federal investment. And so there is no regional allocation to that program.
Yeah. And if the question is for the future, I think that question will be discussed as part of the triennial stake talk discussion.
Right. And just on that, someone's just asked, maybe it was just in reaction to that question. Someone's asked, why do you think that there have been so few BC projects that have been approved thus far? And, they're saying, are there challenges unique to BC and why BC's not had a what I would call equitable share?
Maybe I'll just dispel the myth. We do have a massive pipeline of co-investment applications in BC. But if you recall the requirement of a partner and other funder, BC Housing has just done their call for projects. The last time it was done was 2 years ago. And so during those 2 years was a time where maybe we didn't see the same intake of applications that other parts of the country saw. But going forward, I say you're going to see a lot more activity. And also keeping in mind, co-investment fund is one tool in our toolkit at CMHC, and under the NHS, we have many different programs that clients can access from the insurance side with MLI and MLI Flex. To the RCFI and co-investment. And so it's often the conversation with clients when we show them the options and find out what their needs are that they can choose to go with another program as well.
Someone's asked, and I think I know the answer to this, but it's a good question to ask. If a project obtained land through CMHC's federal land initiative, could the applicant still apply for co-investment fund funding? Is the question, is that considered stacking?
Well, under the NHS, you can stack multiple programs. So the answer would be yes, you could apply to co-investment.
Right. So yeah, federal lands plus co-investment is allowable. Yeah.
Absolutely.
To an earlier question was asking about the eligibility criteria, and I know that that's been that people have raised concerns about that eligibility criteria. Someone's asked the question, what's the rationale for not making changes to the eligibility criteria? I think it was Ben who mentioned in his remarks that the changes don't touch on eligibility criteria. So the person asking, what's the rationale for not reviewing that criteria as well?
Yeah, the eligibility criteria are set in the authorities that the Government of Canada is providing to CMHC. So it needs to be a decision made by the government to change those criteria. We don't have that possibility ourselves. But again, that's why they had introduced through the NHS the possibility to review and to present what we had achieved and what could be changed or enhanced. And that work will be done, and our minister will be tabling that work the next fiscal year at the cabinet.
Okay. Still getting a lot of questions in. Someone's asking, Jennifer's asking, has CMHC published the performance standards that have been set? I think it was referred to, but have those performance standards been published?
In terms of the timelines, if you go to a place to go home and look under the co-investment fund, you can see the 7-step process and the timelines around each one of those, if that's what they're asking for.
Okay, and maybe Carol, we could even, as a follow-up to this to today's presentation, we could even perhaps provide the link so that those standards people can see those standards for themselves.
Absolutely. And in fact, we actually have one last slide that will be included in the presentation that gives a couple of resources for your members to check into.
Okay.
There's a link to the Transformation Center, to the Housing Solutions brochure, which details all of the programs, and also a way to contact your CMHC specialists. And maybe just a little side note about the improvements to the website. As I was preparing for the presentation, I went looking for how do you contact a specialist, and I went to cmhc.ca. I typed in specialist in the search, and the first thing that came up was how to contact an affordable. I think our website has improved a lot just from the internal side too.
And I think that's been a really key message, not just from today, but what we've heard prior is that and what was the term you used? Not Sherpas, but the facilitator or
Concierge.
Concierge.
The concierge, that the CMHC concierges are a really valuable source of information. And I know we've heard when people engage with those concierges that that oftentimes the project is often expedited and simplified. So someone's asked a question, Earl's asked the question, and it's a question we often get, which is that many of the examples that were provided in the presentation are larger urban centers, and that oftentimes the thinking is that smaller rural centers are at a disadvantage in applying to many of these programs. Are there considerations being given in future changes to make this process and make the program simpler for folks in smaller, more rural areas to access?
Maybe I'll go first. You kind of, to steal from Carol, kind of dispel the myth a little bit. And so we're running examples in the presentation where we're larger, more urban centers. But we see a very good mix of files come in from urban and I'll call them non-urban. A lot of the files we do come in are from the smaller communities, and we're very successful in seeing those ones come to fruition. And it really kind of comes down to a case-by-case basis and looking at the files, looking at the financials, and looking at the social outcomes that these files deliver. And how do we then take those files and those situations through to fruition?
And we already have built some flexibility as well, especially for we understand that smaller projects can be we talk about 5 units, but it could be smaller. That's what's needed in a much smaller community. We have flexibilities around accessibility and energy efficiency as well for smaller projects or rural projects. So again, it's really important if you have an idea to contact a specialist, because they can really guide you as to what is already built in terms of the flexibility.
Okay. Thank you. Given the time constraints, we'll get to 2 more questions. And again, I do apologize, we couldn't get to them all. There were actually quite a few questions that came out, but we'll get to at least 2 more. Someone is asking, what is the desired stress test interest rate? The person saying that they're getting different answers from different concierges around the country.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a stab at this one. And so we saw rates being very, very low recently, and we're stress testing these applications really to make sure that from a long-term viability perspective that these projects are going to be viable. There should be consistency amongst the stress testing. If we're coming across example, I'm happy to kind of talk about them offline. But from a stress testing perspective, we're using about 150 basis points.
OK. Et donc, juste la dernière question, et encore, je m'excuse qu'on peut pas demander toutes les questions. Are there any ways that providers can leverage CMHC funding deadlines in order to speed up the municipal rezoning or the municipal approvals process? The example they give is conditional funding if permits are issued within 90 days, or a use it or lose it kind of thing. So have you heard, or, and maybe this is a question for those on the line, but have you heard whether the CMHC deadlines can actually be used in order to assist, at least with the municipal side?
I personally haven't heard that, but one thing for sure, we have very good relationship with many of our Canadian municipalities. And there's an issue and and we could be of some kind of help, please do not hesitate to reach out to the specialists, and we can make some phone calls as well.
Okay. I am conscious of time, and I never want to take advantage of people's time for longer than what we've promised. So Carol, Carolyn, and Ben, first of all, I just want to thank you all for being here for the presentation, for respondents. And to those who did ask questions that we weren't able to get to, we will take note of those. And perhaps Carol, Carolyn, or Ben, if we're able to send those to you in writing, perhaps what we can do is provide a brief written responses to those on the call today, so that if we couldn't get to you, then at least you can still get information that you've requested. Would that be okay with you folks?
That's perfect.
Okay. Well, then again, Justin, merci. Caroline, Ben et Carole ont bien apprécié votre expertise sur cette question. Just for folks on the line, a couple quick notes. First of all, you will receive an email with a survey and with some additional links and resources that were discussed after today's webinar. Your survey responses help us inform future programming, and so for that we want to thank you. I also just want to provide a few reminders of some upcoming sessions. On February 4th, only 2 days away, we're hosting a session at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities on the Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative. And I think Carol made reference to one of the FCM programs. I'm sure they'll refer to that as well. And on February 8th, so next Monday, we will be co-hosting a consultation session in partnership with the Community Housing Transformation Center, where we will be hearing your views on the Rapid Housing Initiative, which was another one of those kind of tools in the toolbox we've that was referenced that people have been able to apply to increase housing supply. We want to get your feedback on what's worked with that program, what hasn't, and where improvements can be made, hopefully for a second round of that program. And then within a couple days, we will be releasing registration and preliminary information on our first ever virtual National Congress, which will be taking place April 27th to 29th. I always want to say where it will take place. It will be taking place right here on your screens. Of course it won't, but it still will have as much informative content and inspiration as the in-person event would have. So we encourage you to watch for that. So donc, une fois plus, je veux remercier nos présentateurs. Et s'il vous plaît, regardez pour un courriel de nous avec un link pour un sondage et plusieurs des ressources et informations qu'on a parlé aujourd'hui. With that, again, I want to thank everyone, the presenters. I want to thank everyone for joining. Watch for an email in the coming days with and more resources on some of the items we discussed today. So have a great day. Thank you all very much. À la prochaine.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.